This time I recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Mr. Santa, I believe you may have heard my questions with the prior panel, and so you know that I'm concerned about placement of gas pipelines. But I want to talk to you about the need for gas pipelines, because that is the driving force behind all of this, particularly in those areas that have been reliant on coal to produce their electricity. With the myriad of different regulations that the EPA has proposed, many of those power generating companies, the electric company as we know it back home, are having to turn to natural gas. Isn't that true?
Yes, sir, that is true.
And as a result of that, and looking forward at the impact of the closing of many coal-fired power electric generation units, many of those, particularly in the southeast and the east, are looking at using natural gas instead. Isn't that also true?
That's correct, sir.
And as a result of that, there are some serious concerns across the industry that if the natural gas pipelines are not built in a quick manner or brought to bear fairly soon, we will have a problem with either rolling brownouts or possibly even blackouts in many parts of the east and southeast. Is that not also true?
Many parties have expressed that in connection with the Clean Power Plan. We are confident that gas and gas pipelines ultimately can meet that need, but Inga, too, in our comments on the Clean Power Plan and at the FERC technical conferences, noted the timing issues in terms of the time needed to develop infrastructure versus the compliance deadlines.
And of course, it's one of the reasons why I support legislation that would cut the Clean Power Plan off until the litigation is over, because it's going to create huge problems for electric generation companies across the United States, but particularly in the southeast and the east. And I have serious questions about the legality of the EPA's interpretation. I should say their new interpretation, not their original interpretation of Section 111D. And so that is one of the big drivers in the reason that right now there are as many as 4. I know of at least 2, a third that I've heard about, and a 4th that's been indicated in an article today, looking at power or gas pipelines in my region, and that's what's driving all of this. Isn't that what you would indicate to us?
It is a significant driver. There's also industrial demand that's part of the demand for those pipelines.
Well, and the natural gas the natural gas price being low is a factor to be considered in that, and that's what's driving that new manufacturing demand as well, isn't it?
That is correct, sir, yes.
And so if we're going to have more good-paying jobs, if we're going to have electricity in our homes, whether I agree with the EPA's regulations or not, we're going to need natural gas pipelines. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, that being said, how can we do this in a better fashion? Because, and I would submit one of those would be to give, a better timeline on the EPA regulations if they are found legal, which I don't think they will be. But what can we do to do a better job? Because the citizen on the ground suddenly has folks in their yard trying to figure out where they're going to place a pipeline, and 1 month it's in one county and the next month it's in another county, and it's really got a lot of folks, I think, legitimately upset that they're about to lose their family farm or their home or their area of concern, nearby them. And how can we allay those fears for the general public?
You're right that this does acutely affect landowners. It affects their major investment, their home, their farm, their property. It also is occasioned by the fact that we've got prolific gas supplies in places that, at least in recent history, haven't been prolific supply areas, and so it has created the demand for more pipelines to get that to the market. I think that overall the FERC does a very good job with its process. I know that Inga and its member companies are committed to this because beyond going through the construction and siting process, these landowners will be our neighbors for years. I think that the legislation today is intended to try to make that process more efficient and yet still respect the rights of landowners and environmental concerns. And also, as part of the administration's quadrennial energy review, the first installment focused on infrastructure. They focused on improving the permitting process.
And I'm assuming that my district or my region, I should say, is not alone in having a number of proposals being made, because we're going to have to move a lot of gas around the country. And of course, we had the governor of Maine in here requesting that we facilitate that somehow to get the gas to them, or to allow them to hook up to electricity either at the hydro side or from Canada. Ms. Elephant, do you think FERC is equipped to take a look at the big picture and decide if they need to have 2, 3, or 4 pipelines passing through the western part of Virginia?
I think at some point somebody has to take a look at the big picture. The Natural Gas Act, although it's not imbued with the same public interest standard as the Federal Power Act governing hydro, does issue certificates for public necessity and convenience. If you look at the history of the Act in some of the older cases, FERC or the Federal Power Commission played a larger role, and they would look to see if there was a need for 3 or 4 pipelines and try to make take a programmatic view of what the public need was. In addition to development of multiple pipelines, there are other ways to increase efficiencies of existing pipelines to capture additional natural gas. FERC, in fact, just last month implemented a policy which would incentivize existing pipeline developers to address leaks in the pipeline. And there was a study shown recently in the Boston area that if you could capture all that leakage, you could increase the pipeline capacity by almost 30%. So I think that in addition to looking at just building more, we need to take a more robust approach and also look at some creative solutions, for example, making pipelines safer and addressing leaks, which is really a win-win for everybody, including the pipeline, which gets incentive payments to do that.
My time is up. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time is up, but this time right now is the gentleman from California.